I call this meeting to order. This is the regular meeting of the Northfield Public School Board. Today is Monday, December 12th, 2016, and the time is 7 p.m. Dr. Hillman, there were a couple of items in the table file.
Yes, this evening we had the PowerPoints for tonight's District Youth Council update. You'll also notice in the table file we've moved the contract for services agreement with Dr. Gary Lewis from the consent grouping to the items for individual action. We also have a leave of absence and a resignation.
Okay. Thank you very much. If there's no objection, we'll add these items to the agenda as we move forward. Excuse me. We now have an opportunity for public comment. This is a chance for anyone residing in the Northfield Public School District to address the board. Just a reminder, if you are here for the Truth and Taxation presentation, you will have an opportunity to speak following that presentation. So if there's anyone else here who wishes to address the board, they could come forward. Seeing no one come forward, we'll move on to approval of the minutes. Board members, you have in your packet two sets of minutes, one from the public hearing of the World's Best Workforce, as well as the regular school board meeting, both held on Monday, November 28, 2016. Is there a motion to approve these minutes? Moved by Jeff. Is there a second? Second by Rob. Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor of approving the minutes of the public hearing of the World's Best Workforce and the regular school board meeting held on Monday, November 28, 2016, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. I will begin with announcements and recognitions. Dr. Hillman.
Yes, and to begin this evening, we have a very special presentation at the 2016 Community Education Conference. A local radio show, El Super Barrio Latino, was awarded with the Minnesota Community Education Association Project Award. And project awards are presented to outstanding projects that have exemplified the concept of community education. And we have an MCEA Region 5 board representative here with us this evening to present the award to the three women from the radio show and Jeff Johnson from KYMN Radio.
Good evening, Chair Pritchard, Dr. Hillman, Superintendent, members of the school board, and all the guests here. I am here as Region 5 representative for the Minnesota Community Education Association. My name is Annie Plottick, and I am proud to be here to present this outstanding project award to the El Super Barrio Latino program. The project was nominated by your director, Aaron Bailey, and your past director, Hannah Putzko. It was one of the 8 regional projects that received recognition at the MCA conference this fall. However, the board of directors do like us to come out and actually do a more local presentation so that the project will receive that local recognition. So, Dr. Hillman, you mentioned what the qualifications and what they needed to do to be selected, so I won't review that again. But just wanted to present this award, 2016 Minnesota Community Education Association Outstanding Project Award to the El Super Barrio Latino program. I'll come up and come on. So I don't know how you can see. Oh, here we are. So. Anyway, here is your award, and on behalf of the Minnesota Community Education Association, thank you very much for all you're doing for the Latino community and the community here in Northfield. Thank you.
And I think if we could go ahead and maybe get you guys, Aaron, to get you a picture over here, so we could not have the lectern in the way, but we'd like to make sure we have a good picture. Congratulations. We're very proud of the programming that you're doing.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for recognizing them and for their great work. Okay. Are there other announcements and recognitions? Dr. Hillman?
Yes, I have several others this evening. We want to congratulate high school and middle school psychologists Carrie Duba and Rachel Hudson on being selected as Northfield's 2016 TIES Exceptional Teacher Honorees. They'll be honored tomorrow at the TIES Education Technology Conference. Carrie and Rachel were selected because of their ongoing use of technology to support all students in achieving the highest possible level. The work that they do to gather and analyze data, collaborate and communicate with multiple stakeholders, and facilitate programs to support our students is essential to the success of many in our district. and we want to congratulate Carrie and Rachel on their outstanding work. This is an annual, we had to have some staff members honored annually. We're really proud that 2 school psychologists for their work with data and helping with the continuous improvement are honored from our district. We'd also like to just highlight that Northfield Promises Career and College Readiness Action Team, led by Northfield High School Guidance Counselor Mark Ensrud and Northfield Middle School Assistant Principal Michael O'Keefe, hosted the 2016 Grad Summit at Carleton College on Friday, December 9th. 175 people attended this event to discuss support for students graduating high school on time with an individualized plan for their future. Participants included 70 Northfield High School students, other school personnel, and community and business partners. Participants had an opportunity to engage in 2 breakout sessions and reflect on their learning through a table exercise at the end of the day. Each participant was also asked to submit an I Promise selfie that demonstrated their commitment to supporting all career and college pathways. Sounds a little bit like our strategic plan, doesn't it? It's almost like there was a plan. And I really want to thank the Healthy Community Initiative and specifically Sandy Malika and Zach Pruitt for their organization of this excellent event. A couple of other announcements here. We were notified just this afternoon that Arcadia Charter School was named a 2017 High Quality Charter School by the Minnesota Department of Education. This honor was granted to only 25 charter schools in the state and allows Arcadia to be eligible for charter school, also known as CSP grants. And of course, the reason we're bringing this up at our board meeting is because we're the proud authorizer of the 2 charter schools within our community, and so we're very proud of Arcadia and the work that they have done. And then finally, I had a chance, Dr. Hardy did as well, attend the 2nd annual Torch Poetry Slam last Friday. There were 21 participants. It's a spoken word piece. Mr. Bogat was there as well, and I don't know if other people were there, but it was really a wonderful exhibit of creativity and poise on stage, and it was just a wonderful evening of spoken word poetry. And we had an all-star cast of judges, including a former National Poetry Slam champion who also performed, and just a powerful scenario to watch. So just another excellent example of our Torch staff. This is the brainchild of Jennifer Lompart, and just another great example of engaging all students in our community. So just wanted to share that wonderful event as well. And that is all I have for this evening.
Excellent, thank you. Board members, other announcements? No.
Did you make that?
Yeah, she's just going to.
All right, I'm going to pull it up. Can you hear me now?
Mine's too loud and hers is.
All right, thanks, no. Board members, are there other announcements or recognitions? Okay. I would just echo what Dr. Hillman said. The Grad Nation Day was incredible, and I think the 70 Northfield students that were there were so articulate, and they were so engaged in the table challenge. And I know Jeff was there, and Ellen, and Fritz and Rob, and so it was. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were there, Fritz. Yes. Anyway, it was well represented by the board, and the kids were excellent and did such a great job, particularly with the table challenge. And it was just amazing to have the student voice represented that day, along with all the business associates or business partners in our community. So it was just an incredibly wonderful event. So good. All right. So that is it for announcements and recognitions. We'll move on now for items for discussion and report. Our first being the 2017 Truth and Taxation presentation by Val Mertsdorf, Director of Finance.
Good evening. I know you guys always look forward to this presentation, so I will jump right in. Get this all set up. So I am here to present our 2016 Pay 17 levy certification, and in addition, as part of the requirements of our Truth and Taxation presentation, we are required to talk about our budget, and we take the opportunity to just go through our revised general fund budget. So just a quick summary, our 2017 property tax levy overall is up about $28,000 or $29,000 or 0.19%. So very stable, consistent with last year. The primary increases are a couple of different factors, actually. The incremental phase-in of the long-term facilities maintenance revenue We are going from 193 per pupil unit to 292, so that's a significant increase. And we did have an increase in pupil units, so our referendum revenue is increasing as well. But we actually saw some decreases that are helping to offset some of those increases, so there's less of a tax impact. We saw a change actually in the operating capital revenue formula. We are essentially getting the same amount of revenue in total. We're just getting less from the levy and more from the state, which helps reduce the taxpayer impact. So, and then there are several just positive and negative adjustments from the prior year cleanup that impacts that. So our total certified levy will be $15,577,064.60. So just as a comparison from last year to this year, like I said, we're up about $28,000. We had a slight, about $4,200 decrease from what was presented in September to what we're certifying today. So we went from going up $33,000 to going up $28,962.48 due to those factors I listed. And this is a slide that just kind of shows the breakout of what all makes up the $15 million property tax levy. As you can see, the most significant funding source is a referendum due to the generous community, that is 48%. The general fund others, about 13%. That makes up things like the local optional revenue, the operating capital, the long-term facilities maintenance, those sorts of things. Debt service makes up another 32%. The voter-approved capital projects referendum of $750,000 is about 5%. And then community services is about 2% of that total $15 million. So as part of the truth and taxation process, we are required to show how the $15 million breaks out in comparison to the prior year and in a couple different categorical layouts. So the first graph up there shows it by fund. So the general fund, we're going to have about $10.2 million, which is $162,000 less than the prior year, or a 1.56% decrease. Community services is also going down about 1.37. A lot of that is due to some formula changes that some negative adjustments that we're seeing coming through. And the debt service fund is actually up about $196,000 or 4%. That is primarily because in pay 16, so our prior year, we actually had a pretty significant debt service excess fund balance adjustment. When you have too high of a fund balance, they kind of adjust it down because we're always paying the 105% of our debt service payments, and so they adjust that if they think we're getting too much, that we don't really need that. So that helped reduce our levy last year. And now that our fund balance is at a little more reasonable range, they typically like to see about 3 years worth of excess. Then our adjustment was a little bit less this year, so that's why we're seeing the increase. We also show it by tax base. So based on the referendum market value or the net tax capacity, those did not change very much at all. One's up 0.58% and the net tax capacity is down 0.17. Those are just different tax bases that are used to calculate some of the different formulas. And then voter approved and other, the voter approved went up about 2.36%, mostly due to the increase in enrollment and the debt service, and the other went down about 3.91%. So overall, we're increasing about 29,000 or 0.19%, so very stable from year to year, which is good news for the taxpayers. And I would like to point out that the voter approved portion is 67% of our total levy, which is a testament to the great community that we're in. Any questions particularly about the levy portion right here?
Val, could you just point out about that sometimes people in the community, when they hear us say that the levy is up 0.19%, but then they get their taxation statement, sometimes they
Yes.
look at it and school taxes have gone up. Would you just explain when we are showing a 0.19% increase, how that sometimes affects taxpayers in a different way?
Yes, that's actually a common question that I get. My phone number is the one that shows up on the tax statements when they're printed. And oftentimes what we will find is that their home was valued higher. And that will play into the amount that they're assessed. And sometimes it is how their home value relates to the other homes in the county. But typically it is their home value was assessed higher. So then they should see a higher amount in all of the categories for the most part. Thank you.
Okay, so before I ask board members for any questions, we would first like to give community members the opportunity to make comments or to ask questions. Is there anyone here who wishes to address the board regarding the truth and tax presentation for the payable 2017 levy? Yes, okay. We ask that you step to the podium, identify yourself by giving your name and address, please.
Thank you,
Thank
and
you.
good evening. My name is Doug Oines. I live at 1900 Sibley View Lane in Northfield. Good evening, Noel. And I appreciate the comments, and I appreciate the direction this district is going. I'm a retired educator from 31 years in Rosemont, Apple Valley, and Egan. And my property tax statement, and yours probably also, if you look at it very carefully, but I'll address mine specifically. My home remains devalued $38,000 from 2008. And yet my school taxes are up about $100 from the year 2008. So while I appreciate the young lady's comments there about home valuations increasing, and yes, they have just a little bit from 2008, I'm still $38,000 behind. And that's just a comment. I don't need any response on that. Rice County couldn't really give me an exact reasons why. The city couldn't really give me exact reasons why. It's just one of those magical things that happens. And that's basically my comments. Keep up the good job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
And now Val's going to talk about the budget revision.
Okay,
Okay.
Oh, you want me to present that later?
well, it's an item for individual action, but she could do the presentation, we could vote on it.
I think typically what we've done is that, because I think the requirements are the fact that she presents something about the budget while she's presenting the truth and taxation. So then when we come back for the items, we wouldn't
Okay.
take questions on it at this point. Then when we come to the item for individual
Sure.
action, we can take questions.
Okay, so if board members have any questions on the truth and taxation, maybe we'll just ask that if, prior to moving on to the general fund amendment, if there's anyone who has, any board members have a question on just the truth and taxation presentation. No? Okay, so then we'll move on for the fiscal year 2016-17 general fund budget revision. Val.
All right. So every year we do the general fund budget revision. It works out pretty well to do it this time of year because we have the October 1st enrollment. Our audit has been accepted at the last board meeting, so we have final data for the prior fiscal year. Typically, all of our employment agreements have been finalized, and we've hired all of the new staff and they've been placed, and we kind of know where we're going. So those are all of the things that I kind of look at and put together. As you've heard a couple of times now, our enrollment has been increasing, much to our surprise sometimes. And this is just kind of a historical, this is our October 1st seat count. And so I want to be clear that it's actual kids sitting in chairs. That doesn't always equate directly to our average daily membership or our adjusted pupil count. But you can see for 15-16, we were at 3983, and we're looking at over 4,000. And so the last 3 years, you can see we've increased just over 1% each of the last 3 years. So with that data and our historical average daily membership and the birth data and a few other things, I put that into our enrollment projection model. and run roughly 10 different scenarios to see where we think our enrollment might be going. I put a little bit of extra information on here just because we have seen such a dramatic increase that it really has shifted the way that our enrollment projection was looking. So the top line there is June of 2015 when we did the adopted budget. The revised budget would have been December of 2015. And then that third line is what actually happened as of what we have for the audited data. And then this past June would be the 2016-17 adopted. So you can see that last year I had projected 42 ADMs and actually increased it almost more than 50 actually, just to the revised budget, and we still ended 34 higher than that. So just in a span of last year, we went up over 80 average or ADMs. In the spring, when I did the enrollment projection, most of the projections we ran were still showing us declining over the next several years. So I actually had booked about like 3846, which was less than the revised budget for 15-16, but based on the historical analysis, it was still trending downwards. So I'm typically pretty conservative in June since there's a lot of unknowns. And with our October 1st enrollment and having 3 years of consistent increases for our October 1st, we are now looking at 3,979.77. That is 134 student increase from this past spring, the way the projection works. So as you can imagine, that has a significant impact on our budget. And I want to point out that in the narrative that I included, I did state that it was 3,980 weighted pupil units. It's actually 3,980 ADMs. The weighted is the next column over. So that was an error in my narrative that I wanted to point out. So we are actually going from 4219 to 4373, which is 154. I have 134 there. The $9,300 per weighted pupil unit, we're looking at 154, not 134. So I apologize for that error, and I wanted to make sure I pointed that out. But that's a significant increase for our budget. And the enrollment projection is very positive for the next several years. So what does that translate to? This is what the revenue looks like. The third column is what the adopted budget includes, and then the 16-17 revised is what I'm proposing tonight. Most of it is pretty similar, as you can see. The state sources is really where the increase is coming into play. And that is basically just because of the enrollment increase. The state revenue is increasing based on the basic funding. So we are going from 49.2 million roughly to just over 50 million for revenue. On the expenditure side, taking into account the audit results, there were a few things with the budget last year that didn't quite line up with what I was projecting. And the adopted budget that I do in June is typically a reflection of that budget, kind of rolling it forward with some known changes. So now that we have that finalized, there were a few changes that shifted, particularly in our staffing budget, things that weren't quite lined up. And so our staffing budget is actually going down from 38.8 to 38.4 roughly. As well as the purchase services is going down as well, and supplies and others. So there were just several categories that overall were just a little overinflated. So we're making this a little more realistic. So going from 50.8 to just over 50 million. So when you put that all together, you can see the beginning fund balance number for the adopted was projected to be 15.7, and we actually had 17.5. We ended last year really well, as you heard at the last board meeting, much better than anticipated. So that gives us a better point to start from. And then with the just over 50 million in revenues, we're still projecting to spend down the fund balance, but just slightly. As you can see, our adopted budget was much more significant. The enrollment makes a significant increase on the revenue side of our budget. So we are actually looking to, I'm projecting to end this fiscal year with 11.8 million in our unassigned fund balance, or 23.7%. Again, we're projecting 17.9 just this past spring. So all in all, the increased enrollment has made a significant difference for our budget. And right now things are in a very good place. And that's about it, I think. Let me make sure. Yes. So I will take any questions about that specifically.
Okay, board members, other questions on the general fund budget revision? Matt, did you have comments?
Well, I think the other piece is we'll have this under an item for individual
Right.
action. Just I apologize for the confusion, but for that, I think one of the key things is the fact that we had been projecting, when you use this and you start to project out, you know that we had been projecting some budget reductions for the 17-18 school year. And with our board goal of a 16% fund balance and looking at projecting the year ending at 23%, the fact is we're very pleased to say that it does not appear that we'll have to do budget reductions for the 2017-18 year or even the 2018-19 school year. So what this really shows, and is, we can certainly discuss it later too, but the power of having 134 more students is amazing. And when we look at it, when we look at the birth to 4 numbers, they're right on with what Hazel Reinhardt had projected a few years ago. But where we're really seeing the increase is in the secondary. And when you see more students in the secondary, remember that secondary students are also weighted at more than 1.0. So you take the bulk of those 134 ADMs, and then you have them weighted at 1.3. That's even a more 1.2. It's an even more significant increase. So I think that this is we never underestimate the power of enrollment.
Exactly. And conversely, you understand how districts really struggle when they talk about
That's
declining
exactly right.
enrollment, and that's where it gets really, really difficult. So, well, with Val at the podium, if board members have any questions for her now, otherwise we will address this issue and item for individual action. So, are there any questions? Ellen.
So I just wanted to touch on kind of the reverse of what you were talking about, Julie, and I don't know that there's an answer, Val, that you can give us, but we can clearly see the power of the increased enrollment, and that we couldn't predict it because we had a demographic report that told us we were going to be flat. So is there, my understanding is that some of the enrollment is because of the open enrollment situation. Is there anything that we would have to have cause for concern going forward, that sort of volatility of these are students that aren't necessarily in the school district, in terms of being able to depend on that? I mean, certainly we can for this year, but thinking in the future, is there any reason that we could anticipate that may shift? I mean, I guess I'm just concerned. This was to our favor, and
well, the one point I will make is the enrollment options report. The only significant increase was the 35 students from Faribault. The rest of it was relatively consistent. It was 1 or 2 here or there. So that's still 100 other students that are likely move-ins, those sorts of things. So that gives me a little bit of confidence that it wouldn't be dramatically 134 the other way. But it is something that we're going to monitor. And I do, in the enrollment model, when I say that we run it 10 different ways, I chose probably the second most conservative one. All of the other calculations showed significantly higher enrollment. And I was, to your point, a little nervous about that, since it was, kind of ratcheting up, and we knew about the enrollment from Faribault increasing. So I did choose one that was more conservative. But it is difficult to say.
And I do think that that's why we also have the monthly enrollment report, because we want to make sure that we keep tabs on it and keep an eye on it as time goes on. And if we see any kind of exodus in terms of that, we're able to keep an eye on that. As the only time where you would really potentially have a curveball if a number of students chose not to come back after the summer. But again, that's the purpose of doing a revised budget as well, and the fact that when we adopt the budget in June, we are able to have the benefit of that October 1 seat count before having to make the budget revision now. So I think that you've seen over the years, Val is very good and very conservative in terms of, we know that enrollment is the one piece that we're always very conservative with, because you'd rather have this kind of pleasant information than the other way. And it almost sounds cliche when we run it 10 different. Actually, you do run it 10 different ways. That's how the software does it. And so you can choose, how you take a look at that. But at the end of the day, we are always conservative on that, because we would, again, rather have a happy surprise than the other side.
Okay. Excellent question. Thank you. Okay. So if there's no other questions, we'll move on. Noel, did you have a question? Okay, sorry. All right, so we will readdress this issue and item for the individual action. We will actually approve the general fund budget revision. Okay, so we'll move on to our other additional items for discussion and report. We have one more item, which is the District Youth Council update. And just a reminder to board members, there is a copy of their PowerPoint presentation in the table file. And I understand we have 3 representatives of the District Youth Council here.
Say, Val, could you help them queue up their presentation, please? Yep, you can stand right over there at the podium.
I'm going to pull it up for you.
Just minimize it.
Is it on the...
Go up to window, Val, the menu window over to the right. Keep going. There you go. And then click the other presentation. There you go.
Did I click it? Yep. Going the wrong way. All right, let's try again. Sorry about that.
Good evening. I'd like to say thank you for just listening on this presentation tonight. My name is Sophie Bernsdorf. I am a senior at Northfield High School, and I am a member of District Youth Council. So the first thing I'd like to present would be the overview of DYC, which is a district-run organization, but the main involvement is the youth, and being a voice for the youth and having a major youth impact involving the district and mainly throughout the high school, since we are all high school students. I was very excited my junior year when I was brought onto the board, because I did want a voice, and I wanted my voice to be heard through my peers and myself about certain issues or events that were happening in the high school, and I felt that I could get my voice out through District Youth Council, and it's helped me a lot to also understand what happens in and around the district. So our main goal is youth input. Another thing we do is each of us are a member of a subcommittee on DPAC, and that has really opened my eyes to a lot of, in-depth issues or ideas involving the district, and it's taught me how the district runs and how the teachers are interacting with each other regarding curriculum or test scores. And it's been a very interesting and exciting opportunity, and I'm very glad I got to be a part of it.
So, talking about a subcommittee called the Diversity and Representation Subcommittee. It works on addressing, right now it's working on addressing mental health issues and concerns, provides information about available resources. It's covering mental illness and how it's treatable and how mental health is important within the sorry, how mental health is important within the school system, and that we need to really have a good focus on that. And then it's also planning to address concerns of minority groups in the school, and is working to improve the representation for minority groups within the school by providing a voice at the table for both DYC and hopefully other committees. All right.
All right, well, introductions to the school board. That is the three of us, which is why we are here presenting to you all tonight. Through our work on this subcommittee, we are hoping to update the school board on what the DYC is doing and hopefully work with the school board to provide youth input on whatever it is that, however we can help you. We're here as an advisory council and we would really appreciate the opportunity to work with the school board. As Sophie mentioned, we have been going to the DPAC meetings, which all of us are enjoying immensely. We are very grateful for the opportunity to sit on that committee, and I think hopefully you've noticed members of the DYC attending the school board meetings. That is something that we're trying to boost attendance to the school board meetings, having at least one or two people come each time, and then we at our meetings report what the school board is talking about and work that into what each of our subcommittees are doing throughout the duration of the year.
Our next topic for DYC is the different boards we host, and one of them is a publicity board, which is an ongoing process. And the publicity board has worked with providing an email display case, a Facebook page, etc. And we really just want to raise awareness for what DYC does. We think it's really important that our peers know that they also have a voice, not just us that appear on DYC. We may be a face and we may be a member, but it really is us students as a whole that need to provide a voice and for what we think is right and in being informed of what the district does. So publicity board, again, like I said, is an ongoing process. They're working just a lot to really raise awareness for what we do and recognizing and letting students know that if there was ever something they needed or something they thought is a problem and the school board or district should be informed, that they can come to us with any problem or reach out to one of our leaders or any of you.
And then the next subcommittee is the Student Handbook and Student Rights Committee. Its goal is to inform students of their rights, mainly by providing updates on Schoology, which is the best way to reach the students, and to examine how the Student Handbook affects the students. We have found that the Student Handbook is only really touched upon once in the freshman year, and we need to change that so that it's addressed every year to update the students and to reaffirm, I guess, reaffirm how they act, I guess. And then to make future plans to continuously update students on Schoology and to show the limitations and privileges that are given to students.
The last subcommittee that we have that was made new this year for us was the Candidate Forum, and it was organized by the students on the DYC, and we modeled it after the Candidate Forum that the Mayor's Youth Council has done in the past. The candidates were interviewed prior to the forum. Thank you for those of you who attended that. And were filmed while answering a question, which was then, the responses to those questions were then sent out to the student bodies so that they could have an idea of what they might expect at the forum. The process gave a valuable insight to the District Youth Council, and we were grateful for the opportunity to perform that. and we were glad that we were able to inform the school and the community as a whole. So lastly, we have our goals that we have achieved, that are in progress, and that we are hoping to achieve. The goal that we've achieved so far is the candidate forum. We feel like that has been a success for us. And I will point out that this is the third year that District Youth Council this is our third year, and the subcommittees were new this year, so we are still figuring out what we're doing. We are still working to find out what the best approach is for us, and we are enjoying the process of figuring it out.
Next is, I guess, our goals and progress. And again, like I said, publicity is our major goal right now. That'll continue throughout every year of DYC. Another thing, along with what Larson said, is work with minority groups. We have a lot of clubs that are being formed right now at the high school, working with minority groups, including the Gay Straight Alliance. And I think it's important that other students are realizing that they have an open door in another community they can be involved in, whether it be their race or their gender identity. And also information on mental health. I think it's extremely important that we are introducing mental health services at a younger age. I think that's becoming more of a problem. I've noticed as a student throughout my 4 years of high school, it's important that not only myself but teachers and staff are voicing that those students who may have issues are recognized, and now to our goals we are hoping to achieve.
All right, so we are hoping to continuously inform students of their rights through Schoology, and then we want to create a publicity event, I guess, for the DYC. And we were thinking that it would be much like the NYC movie nights or something else.
All right, I would just like to say thank you for your time and consideration. And lastly, do any of you have any questions about DYC and the interaction with the school board? Any ideas or thoughts?
First of all, thank you guys for a great presentation. Just wonderful. Really detailed well, and you articulated well what the hard work you've been doing this since just September, so well done. Board members, questions or comments? No.
Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for the opportunity that I had as for the District Youth Council to be able to express my views as a candidate for school board. Thank you very much.
We appreciate it.
Very fine. Good afternoon.
Other questions, comments? Ellen.
So thanks for the presentation. What was really helpful was to hear about the different committee structures. I think those of us who came for the pre-candidate interview got to sort of a preview of what you were thinking this year. So it's really nice to see how that sort of has rolled out. I guess the one question I had for you is, as you're thinking about your interactions with the board, are there things that have come up, that you would want the board to consider in terms of, like one of the new things was to have you be more active on DPAC. Are there other things that have come up that you are interested in or would like the board to hear more about?
As of right now, not specifically. I think we do want more involvement just because, the school board does play a role in the environment here at the elementary schools, the middle school, and the high school. So I think just learning more about what the school board does and the process and how we could help you or how you could help us understand more would be a great place to start.
Okay, other questions or comments?
If I can
Yes.
You know, I really want to compliment you on your preparation, and what I'm also really impressed with was the goal setting that you've done. If you have some clear and concrete goals, you're identifying what you've achieved so far, things that are still in process, and things that are still yet to be done. So I really appreciated that. And I know, a lot of places in education right now, it's very popular to talk about student voice, and you see some ways that students are involved. But this is a perfect definition of what student voice really means. And if you think about the DYC, is it 16 students on DYC?
I believe so,
And so these students are in early, couple Wednesdays a month, and the fact is they're here on a day that they could sleep in. They're getting up to come in to talk about these important issues, and so I think that we're doing it right. I really think we really had kind of a predecessor in the Mayor's Youth Council that of course has been around for a while, and we modeled the District Youth Council after that, but I'm really pleased, and thanks to Malia sitting in the back there who does a lot of the legwork to make sure that students have an opportunity to share their thoughts, to look at important issues, to have a chance to learn that making decisions at a governance level like the board does and through some of the things at DPAC are not as simple as sometimes that they appear. And what we're really trying to do is create the next generation of leaders, and you're seeing 3 of them standing right before you. So I could not be more proud of your work, and I'm really thankful that they had asked to come and give this report, not the other way around. So they found out what's the process for getting on the board agenda, how do we make sure that we submit the slides, all those kinds of pieces. And I could not be more proud of their work. So thank you very much, and please relay that to the rest of the youth council, because we know that you're the representatives here, but there's a number of other people also doing the work.
Thank you, we appreciate it.
Thank you. And just one closing comment. I want to thank Board Member Hardy for serving as a school board liaison with this group. You do a really excellent job of working with them, and so we appreciate you also getting up on Wednesday mornings and being at the meetings. So thank you very much, and we hope that you enjoyed this presentation and the opportunity to do it, and would love to have you back. Thank you.
And going to expect it now.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, so we will move on to, that was our last item for discussion and report. So we will move on to items for individual action, the first being this certified final 2016 payable 2017 tax levy. Is there a motion to certify to county auditors the 2016 payable 2017 final certified net tax levy in the amount of $15,577,064,560? Moved by Noel. Is there a second? Second by Fritz. Any additional questions or comments for either Dr. Hillman or Val?
I think Val gave an excellent presentation, and if you recall last year when our levy was down by 0.2%, I called that flat so that we could make sure we called it flat when it was up 0.19%. So again, if you think about those small percentages, the overall levy remaining just about the same.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we'll move on to the next item for individual action, which is the fiscal year 2016-17 general fund budget revision. Is there a motion to approve the revised 2016-17 general fund budget revenues of $50,055,505 and expenditures of $50,084,219?
So moved.
Moved by Ellen. Is there a second? Second by Noel. Any questions or comments? Okay. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Danita, can I ask for one point of clarification? Did we get a motion and a second on the tax levy? I feel like we
Noel and
crossed-
Fritz, yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, I figured you would have caught that, but all of a sudden I thought I didn't remember
Better to
doing
check.
that. Yes, exactly. Okay, thank you. All right, so our third item for individual action is early childhood special education request. Director of Special Services Cheryl Hall is here to explain that proposal.
Good evening. Thank you for considering my request. I don't know if you remember, but last spring I came to you and asked for 2.0 FTE for an increase over our current staffing ratios that we had, knowing that last year was a very busy year for us for early childhood special education. Little did we think that we would be here in December asking for another increase to help us to meet the demands that we are currently seeing, unlike I have seen probably over the last 15 years that I have been with the district in different capacities. I used to be the early childhood lead person, and so I understand this from that perspective as well. And as you know, we also have a shortage of teachers out there in special education especially. And so getting ahead of this is also imperative, I think, in bringing my proposal forward right now. From the data that you can see, we have a number of referrals coming in at a very high rate, higher than we've ever had. And we see that our numbers by February should be above and beyond where we usually are by June of each year. So the numbers there are significant. And why this is significant is that early childhood special education caseload capacities are in Minnesota state rule, and so we are not allowed to go above those. And so with this, with the students currently in evaluation or being referred at this moment, by the end of January, we will be at that capacity for caseload limits. So we are either looking at overloads for our special education teachers at that level, especially our early childhood special education teachers and or our speech pathologists that are working at that level. So that's why I'm bringing this forward to you tonight.
Okay. Since this is an item for individual action, I would ask that we would have a motion to approve a 1.5 FTE increase for licensed staff to provide services for early childhood special education. Is there a motion? Moved by Ellen. Is there a second? Second by Rob. Okay. Questions or comments for either Cheryl or Dr. Hillman? Ellen.
So this is a question I had asked Dr. Hillman earlier. If this, in thinking about special education, we're always, one of the things to consider is once we put it in place, is it something that's going to need to be maintained in terms of
Maintenance of
effort? And I wasn't sure if this fell into that.
It does, and that's a very good question always to ask, and it's always something that we think about as we add any budgetary items to special education, because we have to maintain effort from one year to the next in our state funding formula or funding budget. And with that, there are only a few ways that we can reduce that budget. And that one of those is student enrollment. If our student enrollment numbers go down significantly, we can then use that as a reason why we are not meeting our maintenance of effort.
So for example, if this bumper crop of early childhood special education students happens to be a bubble, which I don't think that we're convinced it is, but let's just say it was a bubble, and as those students in early childhood special education move through and then matriculate into kindergarten, and we see a significant reduction in early childhood special education numbers, we would be able to reduce staffing in the early childhood special education area, because if the department came and said, you know, why was this the case, we'd be able to show a reduction of pupils in that particular area. So now that may translate if they continue to qualify as they get into kindergarten and first grade, and when they turn 7, if they turn from a developmental delay into another special education categorical assignment. So it's not a true, if they graduate and go on, it's a matter of how many replace them when they get to early childhood special ed.
Right, and so the total special education budget, actually 3 through 21, is one MOE, and now birth to 3 is another set of maintenance of effort at this time. That's a new.
So they've separated it out.
They did separate it out.
Interesting. No.
You used a phrase that I think is common in the industry. You used a phrase that is common in the industry, probably not common to the public. Maintenance of effort. Explain why that's such a dilemma for this, at least for this board member.
Talk about it?
Sure. In special education funding, we have to assure that we continue to fund special education at the same rate from year to year. We cannot go below this funding level that we budgeted for the previous fiscal year. That is there as kind of that safeguard to say that you cannot take your federal funds and supplant your state and local dollars in order to continue the programming at the same level that you did the previous year.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You know, and this is an interesting case because we're kind of boxed in, because Minnesota rule, which has the force of law, says that once we reach a certain number of students within these categories, we're required by law to add staff to bring the staffing ratio down. And yet when that requirement goes into effect, it then also then impacts our maintenance of effort, depending on certain circumstances moving forward. So while we bring this forward as something that we ask for consideration, the issue that we have is if we don't move forward with it, we most likely will be out of compliance very quickly. So this is one of those unique circular pieces that the state has where you're required to change the number of staff because of the pupil to teacher ratio, which is important. We absolutely understand that early childhood special education is one of the best investments that we make, because if we can help mitigate the child's disabilities, the younger they are, the better chance that we have to make sure that they no longer need services as they get older. So while it's a very good investment, at the same time it's a requirement that the state is putting on us, so we really don't have a local decision. And then that is compounded by the fact that the state says the law says once you spend that money, you have to keep spending that money until you have a significant change in pupils. And there's a couple of other conditions that would allow us to mitigate maintenance of effort. But it's an interesting piece for us to work with because of these external requirements.
Board members, other questions? Fritz?
I'm just curious what your best understanding is of why the numbers are up in such a spike. Is that, I assume that's not because there are many more pre-K kids in Northfield.
Well, our birth number is up slightly from the numbers, I think, Val, that you presented. Our birth numbers did go up. So we would expect that a percentage of that might be due to that. We also believe that our early childhood interventionist that does our outreach is actually doing an exceptional job. And actually, we thought we were underfinding, or child find was a little bit under what it should have been in the past, and now we don't believe we are. I think we're catching up to other communities actually and finding kids that do need that intervention.
Which, as you say, is good news in terms of value for effort. So.
Well, we'd much rather learn about the students' needs prior to them coming to kindergarten. In terms of it, what can be very difficult is when a child with special needs shows up to kindergarten and the appropriate evaluations have not been done and those kinds of pieces. It really can be problematic on a number of levels, and we eventually, of course, are able to address those needs. But what we know is by being proactive and trying to identify and intervene as early as we possibly can, we set the student up for their best chance for long-term success.
And there's one other change in the Minnesota state statute is that any child who is referred for child protection is an automatic referral, and we must screen that child and then determine whether or not to go forward with an evaluation.
Interesting. Other questions? Rob?
I'm just interested in the, I'm assuming that this comes to us now because you need to go out and advertise these positions.
Right.
So we can't wait to see if the numbers play out because it would be too late to advertise.
Right, and this is also the time where you have graduates, mid-year graduates, so it's fairly timely with that as well. With our rate right now of how many we are qualifying, I would say that we're still going to reach that level. If not now, we are going to be by the end of the school year.
And to get 0.5 FTE speech pathologist, how hard is that to do?
Very difficult. Very difficult. Hopefully we could even find someone to contract for services that's maybe in the community that might be out there, or we've also have looked at working with recruiting firms as well for some of the other open positions that we've had. So we are looking at a lot of different options to fill those positions.
Thanks.
Other questions? I had a couple. So yeah, I think just sort of interesting how much we've learned now just in a relatively short time about ECSE. So tell me about an IEP that an ECSE student would have. Is it required that they have an IEP through 12th grade, or do they actually, do you close their case out, so to speak, or is that something that we would continue to manage throughout their time in Northfield?
any child that is referred for special education services and qualifies eligibility under one of the categories or under developmental delay for early childhood special education, the child just has to be delayed. We don't even say that they have a true disability many times, because what we're trying to do is mitigate those issues that they have before they get to school. So they have an initial evaluation, initial eligibility, and they would have either an individual family service plan if they're under 3, or they would have an individual education plan after 3 years old. And every 3 years, we have to reevaluate to see if a child qualifies again for services. And then that decision, of course, is made at that time. So yes and no. The
Okay,
child
sure.
could continue to need services, especially if they have significant needs, or if they have a more mild need or maybe just a developmental delay. Many times we do dismiss those children at some point after they've met all of their goals and no longer show a need at the time.
Okay, good. Then my next question is, so as you see these early childhood, are you anticipating then that you'll have to add more special ed teachers as they start coming into the elementary school, or how do you feel that is going to work with current staff at each of those elementary schools?
That's always an interesting question, and every year we do our projections and workload caseload analysis that we are required to do. So as we go into January, that's what we will be developing and determining what that looks like. As you know, we look at, I think Matt mentioned that you have those 12th graders that are leaving, and as we have the kindergartners coming in, then sometimes that balances out and we don't have an increased need across the district, and other years there is an increased need, and there's pockets of those at different times. So.
Okay.
I think the other piece too is we look across the system, and while all students, all ECSE students are essentially in one location, remember that depending on a number of factors, they do filter out to our 3 elementary schools. And then Cheryl and our special education department look across all of the system and determine, is there a lower number of students in a different building this year where we reallocate current FTE to another building. You may recall that it is not uncommon over the years to where we've even made some changes in staffing during the year as students qualify or other pieces play out, because what our special education team is always doing is they're always looking at the entire picture and seeing what's the need at each building and how can we make sure that we have the appropriately licensed people serving the students with the disability that need that particular licensure. And so it is, of all of our areas, special education has some of the most fluidity in terms of staff serving in different buildings from year to year based upon the need.
Sure. Yeah. And then my last question is kind of along the lines of what Rob had asked. So within the ECSE pool of candidates out there, how are you feeling about being able to fill this position?
We have been we're very lucky this fall because we had a leave of absence that we had to fill, and we were able to do that fairly easily. Just happened to have somebody that was in another location in our programs that was licensed and able to move into that position. And then we recently had a staff member move from our early childhood special education teaching position to an early childhood family lead position. So we were able to fill that position as well. So far we've been very fortunate, but we do know it can be very difficult to find someone in early childhood special ed.
Okay, good, thank you.
And just one final comment, you had
Yes.
asked about students exiting ECSE, and I cannot underscore the importance of, and this is I think one of the reasons this is one of the areas that the state has a specific minimum caseload that's in rule. And many of you know in my previous life I was an elementary principal in a building that included early childhood special education students through grade 2. And I will tell you, I had a chance to be a part of many IEP meetings when the student turned 7 years old to where we dismissed them from special education. And I can tell you they were the most joyous days in our building because the system had worked and the students were ready to fly on their own, so to speak. So you had asked that question earlier about students exiting. Well, I think it depends upon the year and a number of other pieces, but students do exit after early childhood special education, and that's exactly the purpose of it, which is one of the reasons I think that the state does have tighter restrictions to make sure that the pupil to student ratio are smaller than other areas, and that they make sure that we are held accountable to that through compliance.
Okay. Excellent, thank you. Thanks for all the work on pulling the proposal together, Cheryl, and for all your work. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. So all those in favor of approving a 1.5 FTE increase for licensed staff to provide services for early childhood special education, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you,
Thank you very
Cheryl.
much.
Okay, we will move on for the fourth item for individual actions, which is a contingency fund, second semester 2016-17. Dr. Hillman.
So as you know, over the years we've used an approach called a contingency funding strategy to be able to identify and to address what we used to call hot spots in class size issues. You know that we had exhausted that fund this summer, and we had to come to you actually in August to ask you to help us with a class size issue in a grade 5 classroom at Sibley. We also at the beginning of the year had several classes in our secondary system that we had some concerns about, some higher numbers. Now, it's not unusual for us to have some higher numbers, especially at Northfield High School, for a number of different reasons. We do have some disparate class size issues, a lot of times resulting from the ubiquitous choice that we have, and we know that we have an action team getting ready to start to look at class size issues throughout the district. But in the fall, when we were still looking at a budget projection that appeared that we were going to be making reductions for the 2017-18 school year, we did not bring forward a request for additional FTE to be able to address some class size issues at Northfield Middle School and Northfield High School. After hearing the audit report and finishing the year up last year, and then looking at not having to complete budget reductions and having a healthier unassigned fund balance than was originally anticipated, I do believe that we have an opportunity during the second semester to be able to provide a small amount of relief across the secondary system. And what I'm asking you specifically for tonight is to authorize the approval of 4 sections, additional sections of classes, 2 at Northfield Middle School and 2 at Northfield High School for the second semester. The building principals would be empowered to be able to place those sections in the place where they think it will make the most difference in terms of addressing class size issues. Now, I want to be very clear, this is not going to address all of the class size issues that we may have at these buildings, but they would be able to help us in the most significant areas where we've had some concern. And again, we're bringing this forward to you because we have a much healthier financial outlook after all the dollars have been counted from last year, and obviously the reason for this need is the increased enrollment that we've seen. And so again, just wanting to empower our principals to be able to do some class size reduction for the second semester. We think that it's appropriate and provide those folks with some relief as we enter the second half of the 16-17 school year.
Okay, thank you. So this is an item for individual actions. So is there a motion to approve 2 additional sections for the second semester at Northfield Middle School and 2 additional sections at Northfield High School for the second semester not to exceed $31,388? Moved by Jeff. Is there a second? Second by Noel. Okay, questions or comments? Ellen.
So I just have a general question. We have just approved the ECSE, and then we're looking at the contingency fund. This is probably going back to Val. So in terms of the adjusted budget, I mean, these are small things, but would the budget, the revised budget that we just approved, have any of these things have any significant changes that we would need to be aware of?
The ECSE ones would likely be an add to the budget. I typically have enough wiggle room in the budget just for other things that come up that are unexpected, so I'm not coming back constantly with budget revisions. 1.5 FTE is significant, but it would depend on when they're hired and placed. It is also half a year cost, so it's not
And reimbursable.
Yep, and reimbursable. So it kind of depends. I'd probably wait and see when they were hired and placed to see where they come in cost-wise, and see how that goes, and potentially bring back an additional budget revision, but off the cuff I would say probably not. It'll be absorbed into the one that you just approved.
Okay. Other questions or comments? Okay. So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, we will move on to the fifth item, which is the approval of the site improvement plans that we have had the opportunity to hear over the course of the several board meetings.
So over the past several meetings, you've heard a number of site improvement plans, very detailed, providing you specific progress on the goals that each site had from the previous year and looking ahead to their goals and their activities for this year. I really appreciate the thoroughness of the presentations within a compressed amount of time. I know that you always really appreciate those presentations. I think people were very well prepared this year. I think that they are really looking at realistic, timely, and all those kinds of smart goals that we're looking at. And I think the most impressive part of our school improvement planning process and the site reports is that what we see of that spirit of continuous improvement. So regardless of the results from the previous year, they're looking at the results, they're trying to explain how they achieved them, and then they're looking forward to what's next. And that is the culture that we have wanted to have, is in terms of that ongoing, regular, continuous improvement process. So as you know, we usually ask you to approve or adopt all of those after we've heard all of them. And so I really appreciate board members' preparation for those. You often ask very insightful questions and really get to the heart of what each school is looking at. And I know they really appreciate your questions and your confirmation of their work. So we are at the end of them for this year, and we ask your approval for all of them in totality.
Okay, excellent. Is there a motion to approve the 7 site improvement plans submitted by building or program staffs for the 2016-17 school year? Moved by Fritz. Is there a second? Second by Noel. Questions or comments that board members have regarding the site improvement plans? Noel?
I want to make sure that the community is well aware that a site improvement plan is not brick and mortar. It's education, and on-site education, not on-site construction or demolition. I've had that question a few
Sure.
times,
Yeah.
and so this is an opportunity to share that. Thank you.
No, I think that's great. No, it's sort of a really good example of how we know what's being said, but someone who's not necessarily
I was
familiar.
site manager once, and I didn't have anything to do with what went on in the building. I had a lot to do with brick and mortar.
Yeah,
As a site
excellent.
manager. So the terminology might be different depending on the industry you're in.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Noel. Other questions or comments? I just had one comment. You talked about the presentations, and so, and they were excellent, and a lot of effort went into really, again, giving us the 30,000-foot view with a lot of really good context, too, about what's happening at each building. And so I went back, and, there's the actual site plan that has to be pulled together. And so I remember seeing lists of all these different names, so I went back and checked, and there was actually, between all of the different buildings and program staff, there was close to 100 people who participated in pulling all those plans together. So I think it's really important that we acknowledge not only those who presented, but the 96 staff, teachers, and parents who actually helped pull together the site improvement plans. So we thank them for their work, for sure. So with that motion and a second, all those in favor of approving the site improvement plans for the 2016-17 school year, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. We will move on to the 6th item for individual action, which is contract for services agreement with Dr. Gary Lewis. Dr. Hillman.
So this was an item that we had originally had on the consent grouping for tonight, and while we typically do have contracts for service on the consent grouping agenda, this one is just a little bit different because of the circumstances, and upon further reflection, I determined that we should move it to an item for individual action, just so I can provide board members and the community with a very clear explanation of what we're looking at here, because it is a little bit different, and we're wanting to ensure transparency. So the story here begins with when the Cannon Valley Special Education Cooperative, of which we're a founding member, determined in mid-October that the cooperative had grown so fast that they needed to hire a full-time executive director. As you may recall, when we first founded the cooperative last summer, Director Hall and Faribault Director Rob Dienert were the director of the cooperative and the assistant director. And of course, very quickly we learned that we needed to have day-to-day leadership of the cooperative. The district, as the fiscal agent for the cooperative, posted the position. We had a number of qualified applicants, and of course our own Assistant Director of Special Education from Northfield, Lynn Kremenga, was hired for the position. We really felt we needed to make a very quick transfer to have that day-to-day leadership for the special education cooperative that has 3 different sites in 2 communities. And so on December 1st, Lynn started her new role as the SEVSEC Executive Director. So then, of course, we have a hole to fill here in Northfield. Cheryl Hall coming back full-time to run special education within the district. We've had a special education assistant or coordinator for many years. And as you can tell, we have roughly 700 plus IEPs. That's pretty conservative.
That's way too high.
Okay, so how many IEPs do we have?
We're at, I would say about 470.
So we still have 470 IEPs, and for one person, Cheryl, to be administering that is just still too much. So we looked at how could we backfill Lynn's position. We looked at a couple of different options. The first option that we looked at is, could we post the position and hire it and get someone in to assist on an interim basis through the remainder of the year. As with all special education licensed areas, there are not a bumper crop of special education directors out there, and if they are, most likely they are employed by another district. So by posting the position, by interviewing and hiring for it, and then needing to allow that person a reasonable amount of time to exit their current school district, we are looking at least probably a 10-week process, probably even conservative, meaning we wouldn't have any additional special education leadership to help Cheryl until potentially early March. Obviously way too long. The second option that we considered was looking internally. Did we have any staff who, while they might not be licensed, could step into a coordinator-like role for the remainder of the year? And as Cheryl and I looked at that option, every suggestion or solution we came to created another problem for us in the fact that we may have to find another special education position that might even be more difficult to fill. So that kept coming back to the possibility of an independent contractor, and we went out and sought individuals to consider, and of course, Dr. Gary Lewis, our former Director of Special Services, is a name that came up pretty regularly. So we had contacted a couple of different people and got quotes from them, and Gary is the person that we're bringing forward to you to suggest that we enter into a contract with. Gary is, of course, retired from the district. He would not be able to provide us full-time service. He'd be able to provide us roughly 3 days per week. The cost is not cheap. It comes at $100 an hour. However, when Cheryl mentioned before about us looking for contracting companies to come and help with things like school psychologist service or speech language services, some of those folks for school psychs or for speech language pathologists are above $100 an hour routinely. So while it's something that is not cheap, it is absolutely within the ballpark of what we're seeing the going rate for these kinds of things. The other piece that we look at with Dr. Lewis and having him be an independent contractor is that since he retired from the system 2 years ago, he knows our procedures, he knows our people, he knows our processes. And unlike any of the other options that we have, he is really a turnkey solution that, should you approve this evening, could actually start this week and continue immediately begin to provide Cheryl with the additional support that she needs. Remember that when we talk about special education administration, we're talking about leadership and direction of things that, as we just mentioned in the ECSE presentation, are bound by law. And when we make a mistake in a lot of different areas, we're able to work through those things. When you make a mistake in special education, there's also the potential for litigation, which we always want to be careful with. And so making sure that we have quality special education leadership is very important. And again, we know Dr. Lewis's significant experience. We know that he understands the system. We know that of all the options that we considered, he is truly turnkey to be able to come in and available and provide that very high level of professional support very quickly. So this is really something that's being proactive and making sure that we are preventing any issues by having a high quality leader be able to come in under a contract for services piece through the remainder of the school year. We're only asking him to come back through the remainder of the school year. The plan would be for us to post the position sometime late February, early March for potentially some individuals who are newly getting their license, or for potentially some other folks from other districts who might be looking at an opportunity to move up in their career. So again, this is not the first time that we've done a contract for service, and almost always we put something like this on the consent agenda. However, upon further review and just wanting to make sure, because it's unique to a certain extent, I wanted to make sure that I provided the full explanation to ensure transparency in your decision making.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so this is a item for individual action. So is there a motion to approve contract for services agreement with Dr. Gary Lewis? Moved by Noel. Is there a second? Second by Ellen. Questions or comments? Rob?
I guess the only question I have is just about the timing, because this came about because Lynn had to move over to a position later in the year. Why wasn't that position hired earlier so that then we could have filled this position earlier?
Well, I will tell you, I think it's important in leadership that when you make a mistake that you admit it. And I will be straightforward that we made a mistake in not hiring an executive director for the cooperative immediately. And if you think about it, remember that we started the cooperative discussion considering 5 different school districts originally. It was going to be Austin, Albert Lea, Owatonna, Northfield, and Faribault. After much work was done, some of the other districts in that potential cooperative determined that a different structure was better for them. So Austin and Albert Lea formed their own cooperative. Owatonna had determined that they were going to continue their programming as it was, and Northfield and Faribault, which unfortunately had had a very successful joint powers agreement for more than a decade, were required by the state due to the new funding structure to create a cooperative. So when we originally were splitting the time between Faribault and Northfield, we were really looking at 2 districts. If you recall, then in the late spring, early summer, in June, Owatonna and then Medford came to the cooperative and said, as we looked at this, we really don't have an option for next year. We would like to join the cooperative. And the cooperative board, remember, which is made up of, at that time it was Northfield and Faribault, made a determination on a long-term basis that having more and larger districts, another larger district like Owatonna as part of the cooperative long-term was going to be a good thing for the cooperative. That is the point when we accepted then that we should have hired an executive director. If you think about it, those 4 districts together are bigger than the Bloomington Public Schools. And Bloomington certainly would have a director over these particular programs. However, at that time, we weren't exactly sure on all the number of students coming for Owatonna. We were learning lots of different things, and the planning was already in motion, and we started the year without an executive director, with Cheryl basically supposedly doing 20% of her time as the cooperative director and Rob Dienert from Faribault doing supposedly 10% of the time. That did not materialize. So the fact is we got into the year, and within the first 6 weeks, we determined that both school districts were suffering from not having a full-time director, and not only was the cooperative having an issue, you also had both school districts struggling because their main special education leaders were providing a tremendous amount of support to the cooperative of 83 students or so. So the cooperative board in October determined we need to go for an executive director. That begets the process of posting, hiring, and going this direction. So Rob, to answer your point, I think that this was an error on our part in terms of not having a long enough vision to be able to have that done earlier. My first rule of digging yourself out of a hole is to stop digging, and that's what the SevSec Cooperative Board did by posting an executive director. So I have to be just straightforward and honest with you that when we look back at it, it was a mistake that we made, something we should have done back then, but a mistake is only a mistake if you fail to correct it. And fortunately, we are very lucky, I think, to have someone like Dr. Lewis be able to step in, because very rarely do you have someone who knows the system and all those kinds of pieces to be able to come in and step in. And yes, I would prefer to have had it done in a number of different ways, but as you all know, I'm a terrible liar, so I'm just going to tell you exactly what it is. And that is how we arrived here. And I really do believe that by having an executive director for the cooperative, it's making our special education program stronger. By not dividing leadership, in terms of their focus, we're making both programs stronger. Mm-hmm. And really what we need is this shot in the arm to be able to make sure that we are able to successfully get through the remainder of this year, and then posting the position for next year. And then we'll be back and we'll have learned by that point. I believe we have learned that we really need to ask 2 or 3 more questions when we think that we have the good idea of sharing positions. Because we've tried it a couple of different times out of stewardship, which is a good thing. It's a good place to be. But I think we've also learned that individuals cannot serve 2 masters effectively, despite great effort on people's parts. But the truth is, especially when it comes to special education leadership, it requires day-to-day and boots-on-the-ground kind of problem solving. And dividing those people's attention is not something I will recommend again in the future. And if so, I hope the board will call me on it.
Okay, other questions or comments? No.
I appreciate Dr. Hillman bringing this forward for discussion because I think it's an item that the community needs to understand. This item came up when I was campaigning, and I responded by saying special education is the fastest growing enrollment segment of public education. Special education is the most expensive segment of public education as measured by per pupil. Special education has the least slack in measured standards. Special education is measured and evaluated to a greater extent than I think any other segment of education. And lastly, my comment was I'm proud of the work that Northfield Public Schools are doing in the area of special public education. And for that, I was severely scolded for blowing the whole thing out of proportion and using scare tactics to increase future funding support. And I said, well, that's why I get paid these big bucks. And that was it. We had no further discussion. I don't know where the issue is with this individual, but I think Northfield does an excellent job. And thank you, Dr. Hillman, for bringing this forward.
Other questions or comments? I just had a couple comments. I think we'd be remiss in not acknowledging Cheryl Hall and all the work that she's done and what an incredibly difficult situation this has been for her and her efforts to really service and provide the best service to all the students, and it's really difficult. I know you mentioned the 476 something IEPs, but isn't there 120 504s or something like that?
Yes.
Yes. So there's a lot of students, a lot of things to manage. So I also want to note for Dr. Hillman that one of the first presentations you did to the board was challenges and celebrations, and you, I think, have really done a good job of managing the board's expectations and saying that SevSec was new and that we had to learn along the way, and I think this is one example, and that you pointed it as a challenge and a celebration in many ways for the great education that we are providing our special ed students through SevSec, but you also, I think, also rightfully pointed it out as a challenge. So I think that the board has been cognizant of that, and we realized, I think at the time that there would be situations like this coming forward. So I think this is just one example of the challenge, but we're overcoming it, and I think at the end, that's all good. So I plan to support the motion.
Can I just make 2 more points?
Yes.
Number one, what you said about the challenge with starting the cooperative, we have to always go back to remember that it's like we are starting a new school. We are starting. It's not like we are starting a new school district. It's its own school district, its own MDE number. It has all of its own systems. We just happen to be the fiscal agent for it. And from everything from the staffing to the letterhead, had to be changed and different. So I think that this is part of the growing process. And I think the other piece I just want to point out is this contract will still remain within the budgeted amount that we had for special education leadership at the end of the year.
Okay, excellent clarification. Thank you. Okay, so any other further questions or comments? Okay, so we have a motion and a second to approve contract for services agreement with Dr. Gary Lewis. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we will move on now to approval of the consent grouping. As a reminder, there were just a couple personnel items in the table file to be added to the consent grouping. Is there anything anyone would like to pull from the consent grouping? No? Is there a motion to approve the consent grouping? Moved by Ellen. Is there a second? Second by Fritz. All those in favor of approving the consent grouping say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We'll move on to items for information. We have only one this evening, and that's the enrollment report through December of 2016.
So I think that if you take a look at our December 1st count, you'll notice the grand total that we are at 4,063.5 students. And I think if you remember last month when we were talking with a all-time high number of 4,077.5, we pointed out that in that count we had about approximately 20 German students from Germany who are on an exchange program and were here long enough to qualify to be counted in our student count. But to underscore the continued increase in enrollment, if you look between October 3rd and November 1st, we went up by approximately 28 students. And when we look at the December 1st count, we only dropped by about 14 students. So we are, despite the exit of our German exchange students who were here for a short visit, we still see a higher number than we had above October. And so I think that that's really important because these are, like we said before, these are not projections. These are students who are here accessing our services. And of course, enrollment increase has lots of good news, and then it also has its challenges as well.
Okay. Any questions on the enrollment report? Okay. So that's it for items for information. Reminder of future meetings. Monday, January 9th, 2016 at 7 p.m. We'll start with the organizational meeting, followed by the regular school board meeting that same evening. And then Monday, January 23rd at 7 p.m. All those meetings will be held in the High School Media Center. And I have one final item for tonight. We would like to acknowledge that tonight was Fritz Bogat's last meeting as a school board member. Fritz was appointed to the board in early 2016. From day one, his depth of knowledge and extensive experience gave him invaluable insight into the critically important issues facing the district, including the hiring of a new superintendent and the development and final approval of a master facilities plan. His greatest legacy, however, is undoubtedly the key role he played in the development of the district's new strategic mission and vision that will serve our community well into the future. It is clearly evident to all of those who are fortunate to work with Fritz that he is fiercely passionate and committed to seeing all students be successful. We all have a profound respect for the way he approaches every challenge with great tenacity and an unrivaled spirit. He fuels those around him with his roll up your sleeves and get the job done attitude. Recognizing the daunting reality of Northfield's achievement gap statistics, he and his wife Rachel started Accelerate Northfield. This program has provided well over 16,000 tutoring hours in our schools since its inception. In addition, he is currently a key member of the Northfield Promise Reading by Third Grade and Communications Action Teams. So Fritz, I know I speak on behalf of my fellow board members when I say a heartfelt thank you to you for your exemplary service. We rest assured, however, knowing that our district will continue to benefit from your knowledge and most importantly for your passion for ensuring all students are successful. So we thank you for all you've done, and most importantly we thank you for all you will continue to do. And you know we wish you all the best. Yep, I've got to stand up for that one for sure. Okay, so with that, I ask for a motion that we adjourn. Moved by Noel. Is there a second? Second by Fritz. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. We are adjourned.